She was 11 when her father, the Alpha King himself, dragged her into the dark forest, left her bleeding in the mud, and walked away without looking back because an Omega daughter was a weakness he refused to carry. Years later, she returned not as the broken child he abandoned, but as the Luna who would bring him to his knees. Welcome back to my channel, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The night the Alpha King chose a son over a daughter, the forest listened and remembered. Susan was 11 when he took her by the wrist, his grip iron, his silence heavier than armor. Rain slid through the black canopy of the thornwood forest, dripping from needles and leaves like the world itself was weeping. Behind them, torches from the castle faded into distant, dying stars. Ahead lay only roots, mud, and the quiet breathing of wolves who knew better than to interrupt an Alpha's cruelty. Her father, Alpha King Anthony of the Silverstone Pack, had not spoken since they left the castle grounds. His jaw was set, his crown dark against the storm clouds, and his eyes looked everywhere except at her. She stumbled over a root, and his grip tightened. Not to steady her, to drag her forward. "Father," she whispered, voice small and breaking. "Where are we going?" He said nothing. The trees grew closer, their branches tangling overhead like clawed fingers. The rain fell harder. Her thin dress clung to her skin, and her copper braids hung heavy down her back, dripping water that tasted of salt and fear. Finally, he stopped. They stood in a clearing where the moonlight barely reached, where the ground was soft with rot and the air smelled of damp earth and something darker, something that had died here long ago and never quite left. "You were born wrong," her father said at last, voice flat, almost bored. He still wasn't looking at her. "I need an heir. Not an Omega mistake." Susan's breath caught. She'd heard the whispers in the castle, how disappointed he'd been when she presented as Omega at her 10th-year ceremony. How he'd raged in private, thrown goblets, demanded the moon goddess explain herself. But she'd thought, she'd hoped. "I can train," she said quickly, desperately. "I can be strong. I can. You're weak." He cut her off with the efficiency of a man ending a conversation about weather. "Weak blood produces weak heirs. I will not curse my kingdom with your failure." Then he shoved her forward. She fell hard, bark scraping her palms, pain blooming warm and sharp along her leg where she hit a stone. The world tilted. Rain filled her eyes. By the time she dragged herself upright, gasping, her father was already walking away. His crown glinted faintly between the trees, a dark silhouette melting into darker forest. "Father." Her voice cracked, raw and pleading. "Please." He did not stop, did not pause, did not even flinch. Kings, she would learn, did not look back at errors. The forest swallowed him whole. For a long moment, Susan knelt there in the mud, trembling, waiting for him to return. Waiting for this to be some cruel test, a lesson in resilience, perhaps, or obedience. But the forest remained silent except for the rain. And the rain said nothing kind. That night was her first death, or so it should have been. Hunger gnawed like a rat with sharp, persistent teeth. Rain soaked her dress until it clung to her skin like a second, colder layer of suffering. She tried to find her way back, stumbling through the trees, calling out until her voice gave out entirely. Nothing answered except the wind. By the time darkness fell completely, she'd collapsed against the base of a massive oak tree, shivering so hard her bones ached. Her hands were scraped bloody. Her leg throbbed. And somewhere deep in the forest, she heard howling. Wolves. They came slowly, circling her like predators assessing prey. Yellow eyes glowed in the darkness, low and curious. One, a huge male with a scarred muzzle, stepped closer, sniffing the air. His lips pulled back, revealing teeth like daggers. Susan pressed herself against the tree, heart hammering so hard she thought it might break her ribs. The wolf sneezed. Actually sneezed, a sharp, affronted sound, as if the scent of her fear and blood personally offended him. Despite everything, the cold, the pain, the absolute certainty she was going to die, Susan laughed. It was quiet, cracked laughter that hurt her throat. But it bubbled up anyway, helpless and slightly unhinged. If she was going to die, she would not give the forest the satisfaction of hearing her beg. Instead, she pressed her forehead to the damp earth, closed her eyes, and whispered to the moon barely visible through the canopy. "I will live, even if it makes you regret it." The moon, notoriously fond of stubborn girls, listened. The wolves, for reasons Susan would not understand for years, stopped circling. They sat. And they waited. Days blurred into weeks. Weeks into months. Survival became a language she learned one painful syllable at a time. She learned which roots hid edible bulbs and which would make her vomit until she wished for death. She learned that some berries lied sweetly, bright, and tempting before poisoning you slowly. She learned to read the wind, to follow streams, to sleep curled like a question mark between stones where the ground held some faint memory of warmth. The wolves stopped being threats and became neighbors. Wary neighbors who occasionally stole kills and left her the scraps, as if to say, "If you must exist here, do it properly." One old she-wolf with a torn ear seemed particularly invested in Susan's survival. She would appear at dawn sometimes, drop a rabbit or a hare near Susan's makeshift shelter, then disappear back into the trees without ceremony. Susan named her Gray Tooth. "You're judging my shelter, aren't you?" Susan muttered one morning, gnawing on a rabbit haunch while Gray Tooth watched with unimpressed yellow eyes. "It's not much, but it keeps the rain off." "Mostly." Gray Tooth huffed and lay down, resting her scarred muzzle on her paws. "Yeah, well, you try building a shelter with no tools and see how fancy yours turns out." Humor, Susan learned, was survival. When rain soaked her bones for the 5th day in a row, she told herself at least she wouldn't need to bathe. When hunger clawed her guts so badly she couldn't sleep, she named it Bitey and scolded it like a badly behaved pup. Misery, after all, hated being mocked. The seasons turned. Her dress became rags. Her copper braids grew tangled and wild. Her skin tanned and toughened. Her hands, once soft from castle life, grew calloused and strong. And somewhere deep inside, where the scared 11-year-old girl used to live, something else grew. Something sharper. Something that would not break. She was 13 when the first pack came. They arrived at dusk, torches blazing, howling conquest through the trees. A raiding party from the Iron Ridge pack, pushing into neutral territory, claiming land that wasn't theirs. Susan heard them long before she saw them, the heavy tread of boots, the rough laughter, the crackling of fire. She should have hidden. Should have melted into the forest the way she'd learned. But Gray Tooth stood at the edge of the clearing, hackles raised, teeth bared. And behind her, 3 younger wolves, Gray Tooth's pack, waited. They were protecting her shelter. Something hot and fierce surged in Susan's chest. She stepped out into the open. The Iron Ridge wolves burst through the trees a moment later, 6 of them, all male, all armed with crude spears and confidence that came from never being challenged. The leader, a broad-shouldered alpha with a scar splitting his eyebrow, stopped when he saw her. Then he laughed. "An Omega girl?" He nudged the wolf beside him, grinning. "Is this a joke? Did someone leave their pet behind?" The others joined in, their laughter echoing through the clearing. Susan didn't move, didn't blink. She just met the alpha's eyes and smiled, a small, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. The laughter faltered. "You should leave," she said quietly. "Should we?" The alpha took a step closer, still grinning, but there was something uncertain in his eyes now. "And who's going to make us?" "You." "No," Susan said. Then she tilted her head back and howled. It wasn't a wolf's howl, not quite. It was something older, wilder, a sound she'd learned from Gray Tooth and the forest itself. The trees seemed to shiver. And then the wolves came. Not just Gray Tooth's small pack. Dozens of them, melting out of the shadows like smoke-given teeth. They surrounded the clearing, silent, yellow eyes glowing in the torchlight. The Iron Ridge alpha's grin vanished. "What?" Susan stepped forward. The wolves moved with her, a living tide. "Leave," she said again. Softer this time. "Or stay here forever." The alpha looked at his packmates, looked at the wolves, looked at the small, mud-streaked girl with copper braids and eyes that had forgotten how to fear. He ran. They all did. When dawn came, Susan knelt in the clearing, surrounded by wolves who had answered her call. Greytooth pressed her scarred head against Susan's shoulder, an acknowledgement, a bond. That was the night Susan realized something terrifying and wonderful. She did not belong beneath alphas. She belonged beside something greater. 2 years passed like water shaping stone, slowly, relentlessly, leaving marks that could not be undone. Susan turned 15 in the forest, though she'd stopped counting seasons the way castle dwellers did. Time in the Thornwood moved differently. It was measured in survival, in scars earned and lessons learned, in the phases of the moon that watched her grow from broken child into something the forest itself seemed to recognize. She was taller now, though still lean. Her copper braids had grown wild and thick, threaded with small bones and feathers she'd woven in gifts from Greytooth's pack. Her eyes had changed too. They no longer held the softness of a girl raised in silk and safety. They held winter. The wolves came and went as they pleased, but they always returned. Greytooth was constant, a grizzled shadow who slept outside Susan's shelter and judged her hunting techniques with the severity of a disappointed grandmother. "I got the rabbit, didn't I?" Susan muttered one afternoon, holding up her kill while Greytooth snorted disapprovingly. "It's not my fault it took 3 attempts. They're fast." Greytooth's expression clearly said, "In my day, we caught rabbits on the first try. You also have 4 legs and fangs. I'm working with less." Still, Susan had learned. Her aim with the sling she'd fashioned from strips of leather and stone was deadly now. She could track prey through rain, could read the forest's moods in the way the birds went silent or the wind shifted. She'd learned to fight too, not with weapons, but with instinct, with the feral efficiency the wolves had taught her. But the loneliness, that never quite went away. Sometimes, late at night when the fire burned low and Greytooth was out hunting, Susan would stare at the stars through gaps in the canopy and remember what it felt like to hear human voices. To laugh with someone who could laugh back. To be more than a ghost haunting the spaces between trees. She told herself she didn't miss it. The forest, she was learning, had little patience for lies. The greater alpha came on a night when the moon was full and heavy, hanging in the sky like a silver coin the gods had forgotten to spend. Susan sensed him before she saw him, a shift in the air, a change in the way the wolves moved. Even Greytooth lifted her head, ears forward, tail still. Not alarmed. Waiting. Susan stood, hand instinctively reaching for the knife she'd carved from bone. It wasn't much, but it had kept her alive this long. Then he stepped into the clearing. He came alone. No torches. No guards. No proclamation of power. Just silence. He was tall, taller than any wolf she'd seen in human form, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore simple traveling clothes, dark and worn, but there was something in the way he moved that spoke of absolute authority. Like the forest itself might bow if he asked politely. An alpha king. She knew it instinctively, the way prey knows a predator. But here was the strange part. He knelt. Not halfway. Not in mockery. He knelt fully, one knee pressed into the damp earth, head bowed, before he even spoke. Susan blinked. "Are you lost?" His mouth twitched almost a smile. "No." "Injured?" "No." "Then why are you kneeling in my clearing like you're waiting for the moon to give you instructions?" That earned a real smile, brief but genuine. He lifted his head, and when their eyes met, something shifted. The air felt heavier. Warmer. Susan's breath caught. "I have been searching for you," he said, voice low and steady. "The moon speaks your name." She eyed him skeptically, knife still in hand. "The moon talks too much." He laughed, deep and startled and completely unexpected. It was the first time in years someone had laughed with her instead of at her survival. The sound did something strange to her chest. "I am Jason," he said, still smiling. "Alpha King of the Northridge Pack." "Congratulations," Susan said flatly. "I'm Susan. Omega of the Thornwood Forest and professional disappointment to my bloodline." His smile faded, but not in offense. In understanding. He stood slowly, hands open, non-threatening. I know who you are. I know what was done to you. Do you? Her voice went cold. Then you know I'm not interested in packs or kings or anyone who thinks blood determines worth. I do, Jason said quietly. Which is why I'm not here to claim you. That surprised her enough that her grip on the knife loosened. Then why are you here? He was quiet for a moment, gaze steady and uncomfortably direct. Like he was seeing past her defenses, past the walls she'd built, straight down to the lonely, stubborn core of her. Because, he said finally, the moon showed me a girl who commanded wolves and survived what should have killed her. And I thought. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I thought she might want to know she's not the only one the world tried to break. Susan stared at him. Greytooth huffed and lay down, apparently deciding Jason was acceptable. Are you trying to recruit me? Susan asked suspiciously. No. Adopt me. Gods, no. Then what? Jason's storm-gray eyes held hers. I'm offering you a choice. Stay here if the forest is enough. But if you want more, if you want to see what you could become with training, with resources, with people who won't measure your worth by your rank, my pack would welcome you. As what? A charity case. As an equal. The word landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Equal. No Alpha King had ever used that word with her. Her own father certainly never had. I don't trust easily, Susan said. Good, Jason replied. Neither do I. And if I say yes and decide I hate it, then you leave. No one will stop you. She studied him, the set of his shoulders, the steadiness in his eyes, the way he didn't fidget or push or demand. He simply waited, patient as the forest itself. Finally, Susan sheathed her knife. 1 week, she said. I'll give you 1 week. If I don't like it, I'm gone. Jason nodded, something like relief flickering across his face. 1 week. As he turned to lead her from the clearing, Greytooth rose and padded after them, tail swishing. Your wolf is coming too? Jason asked, glancing back. She's not my wolf, Susan said. I'm her human. There's a difference. That earned another laugh, quieter this time, but no less genuine. And as they walked through the moonlit forest, Susan found herself noticing things she shouldn't. The way his voice rumbled low in his chest, the breadth of his shoulders, the careful way he moved branches aside so they wouldn't snap back at her. She told herself it meant nothing. The forest, once again, knew better. Northridge territory was nothing like Silverstone Castle. Where her father's lands had been all sharp stone walls and cold marble halls, Northridge sprawled across rolling hills and thick forests, dotted with simple wooden homes and a grand hall built from ancient timber that seemed to grow from the earth itself. The pack was larger than she'd expected, hundreds of wolves, maybe more, but they didn't crowd her. Didn't stare with the cruel curiosity she remembered from her childhood. Instead, they nodded respectfully as Jason led her through the central village, some even dipping their heads in acknowledgement. They're not afraid of Omegas here, Jason said, noticing her tension. Rank matters less than loyalty and skill. And if someone challenges that belief? His smile was sharp. Then they learn quickly. He gave her a room in the guest wing of the grand hall, simple but clean, with a real bed and windows that looked out over the forest. Greytooth immediately claimed the corner near the fireplace, circling twice before flopping down with a satisfied grunt. I'll have someone bring you clothes, Jason said from the doorway. Dinner is at sundown if you're hungry. No pressure. He started to leave, then paused, glancing back. Susan. She looked up. I'm glad you came. Something in his voice, genuine and unguarded, made her throat tighten. She managed a nod. When he left, she stood in the center of the room, suddenly overwhelmed by the strangeness of walls and warmth and safety. Greytooth lifted her head and made a low, questioning sound. I know, Susan whispered. I don't trust it either. But that night, for the first time in 4 years, she slept without checking for wolves. The week passed like a dream Susan kept waiting to wake from. Jason was true to his word, no pressure, no expectations, no attempts to mold her into something she wasn't. Instead, he offered her freedom she'd never known, even before the forest. On the second day, he introduced her to the training grounds. You've survived alone, he said, watching her eye the practice weapons with suspicion. But survival and mastery are different things. I can teach you the difference if you want. And if I don't? He shrugged, easy and unbothered. Then we find what you do want to learn. She picked up a staff, testing its weight. Teach me. What followed was the most humbling and exhilarating experience of her life. Jason fought like water, fluid, adaptable, impossible to predict. Within minutes, Susan was on her back in the dirt, staff knocked aside, breathing hard. He offered his hand. She took it. His palm was warm, calloused, and when he pulled her up, she stumbled slightly into his chest. For a heartbeat, they were close enough that she could smell him, pine and rain and something darker, like smoke from a fire that never quite went out. Again, she said, stepping back quickly. His mouth quirked. Again. They trained until sunset, until Susan's muscles screamed and her hands blistered. But she was smiling, actually smiling, in a way she hadn't since before her father dragged her into the forest. You're fast, Jason said as they walked back toward the hall, both of them sweaty and dirt-streaked. Faster than most wolves I've trained. Forest raised, Susan replied. You learn to be fast or you become dinner. Fair point. He glanced at her, and something in his expression softened. You're staying, aren't you? Past the week. It wasn't really a question. Susan looked away, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of blood and gold. Maybe. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. I'll take it. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Susan found herself noticing things again, the way his hair caught the light, the easy confidence in his stride, the way he seemed to take up space without demanding it. Why me? She asked suddenly. You're an alpha king. You could have anyone. Why search for a broken omega in a forest? Jason stopped walking. For a long moment, he just looked at her, really looked, like he was weighing how much truth to share. Because, he said finally, voice quieter, I know what it's like to be deemed worthless by the people who should have protected you. And I know what it's like to prove them wrong. He paused. You're not broken, Susan. You're forged. Something cracked open in her chest, a door she'd kept locked for years. She didn't know what to say to that. So she just nodded and kept walking. But she stayed. The third day, Jason introduced her to his council, 5 wolves who served as advisors, all of them watching her with varying degrees of skepticism. An Omega, one of them, a grizzled male named Torvin, said bluntly. In council chambers? Yes, Jason replied, tone allowing no argument. But she commands wolves without a pack bond. She survived 4 years in the Thornwood alone. She learns faster than any recruit I've trained. Jason's storm gray eyes swept the room. If anyone here has a problem with her rank, they can take it up with me. Privately. Silence. Susan fought the urge to smile. Torvin grunted, studying her with new interest. Can you read? Yes. Right? Yes. Track a deer through rain? With my eyes closed. That earned a bark of laughter. All right then. Let's see what you've got. The council meetings became her education in pack politics, the alliances, the disputes, the careful balance of power that kept hundreds of wolves from tearing each other apart. She absorbed it all like a plant finally given sunlight. And Jason. Jason watched her with something that made her pulse quicken whenever she caught him at it. On the 5th day, she found him in the archives, a room filled with old scrolls and bound records, frowning at a map. Problem? She asked from the doorway. He glanced up and his expression cleared slightly. Border dispute. The Ironridge pack is pushing into neutral territory again. Susan stepped closer, studying the map. Ironridge? They raided the Thornwood 2 years ago. What happened? I convinced them to leave. Convinced? She smiled, small and sharp. With wolves. Jason leaned back, impressed. You're full of surprises. So I've been told. Their eyes met, held. The air between them felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. Susan broke first, looking back at the map. If Ironridge is expanding, they'll hit your eastern border next. Here. She tapped a spot on the map. The terrain favors ambush. You could set up a patrol rotation. Or, Jason said slowly, you could lead it. She blinked. What? Lead the patrol. You know the Iron Ridge Alpha. You know the terrain. And my wolves will follow you. I've been here 5 days. And you've earned more respect in 5 days than some wolves earn in years. He stood, moving around the table until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I'm not asking you to prove yourself, Susan. I'm asking because you're the best choice. Her heart hammered. You barely know me. I know enough. The way he said it, certain and unwavering, made something warm unfurl in her chest. One patrol, she said. One patrol. His hand brushed hers on the table, brief, probably accidental, but it sent electricity racing up her arm. She pulled away, cleared her throat. I'll need Greytooth. Naturally. And access to your scouts' reports. Done. And if I mess this up, you won't. The confidence in his voice was almost insulting. Almost. Instead, it made her want to prove him right. The patrol was supposed to be routine, a show of force, a warning to Iron Ridge to back off. It was not routine. They spotted the Iron Ridge wolves on the second night, 12 of them, pushing deep into Northridge territory, led by the same scarred alpha who'd fled from Susan's clearing years ago. He didn't recognize her at first. She'd changed too much, taller, stronger, dressed in Northridge leathers instead of rags. But when she stepped into the torchlight, flanked by 6 Northridge warriors and Greytooth's low, rumbling growl, his face went pale. You, he breathed. Me, Susan agreed pleasantly. Fancy meeting you here. Lost again. The Iron Ridge Alpha's hand went to his weapon. You think you can threaten us? You're just an Omega playing at. Greytooth lunged. Not to attack, just to snap her jaws inches from his face, teeth gleaming in the firelight. The Alpha stumbled backward. That's Queen Greytooth to you, Susan said mildly. And she's had a long day. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your wolves and leave Northridge territory. Now. Or I let her have the argument instead of me. The Alpha King will. Already knows I'm here. And he's waiting for my report on whether you left peacefully. She smiled. Or in pieces. The Iron Ridge Alpha looked at his wolves. Looked at Greytooth. Looked at Susan's calm, unbothered expression. He ran. Again. When Susan returned to Northridge 3 days later, Jason was waiting at the gates. How did it go? He asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. They won't be back. Good. He fell into step beside her as they walked toward the hall. The council wants to make your patrol position permanent. Susan stopped walking. Permanent. You're good at this, Susan. And the pack. He paused, choosing his words carefully. They follow you. Not because of rank. Because of who you are. I've been here a week, Jason. I know. His voice dropped lower, intimate. And if you want to leave, I won't stop you. But I hope you stay. The way he looked at her when he said it, like she was something precious and powerful and worth hoping for, made her breath catch. Why? She asked quietly. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. His fingers brushed a strand of copper hair that had escaped her braid, tucking it gently behind her ear. Because, he said, voice rough, you make me remember why I wanted to be Alpha King in the first place. Not for power, but to build something worth protecting. His hand lingered near her face, thumb barely grazing her cheek. Susan's pulse thundered in her ears. Before she could respond, before she could figure out what she wanted to say, Greytooth headbutted Jason's leg impatiently, breaking the moment. He laughed, stepping back. Right. Food first. Feelings later. I don't have feelings, Susan said automatically. Sure you don't. But as they walked into the hall together, Susan caught herself smiling. And for the first time since her father left her in the forest, she let herself imagine a future that didn't involve being alone. Months passed like pages turning in a book Susan hadn't known she was writing. She stayed. Not because Jason asked, but because she chose to. The difference mattered. She took the permanent patrol position, leading border runs with an efficiency that earned grudging respect even from Torvin. She trained daily with Jason, their sparring sessions becoming something the pack gathered to watch, not because of the violence, but because of the way they moved together, anticipating each other's strikes like dancers who'd practiced the steps for years instead of months. You're getting better, Jason said one afternoon, breathing hard, staff raised in defense. "You're getting slower," Susan replied, then swept his legs out from under him. He hit the ground with a grunt, and she was on him immediately, staff pressed lightly against his throat. They were both breathing hard, both flushed from exertion. And suddenly Susan was very aware of how close they were, her knees on either side of his hips, his chest rising and falling beneath her, his storm gray eyes locked on hers with an intensity that had nothing to do with combat. "Do you yield?" she asked, voice coming out rougher than intended. His hand came up slowly, fingers wrapping around the staff. Not to push it away, just to hold it. To hold her there. "Never," he said quietly. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning that had nothing to do with sparring. Someone in the watching crowd whistled, breaking the spell. Susan pulled back quickly, face heating. Jason rose with his usual grace, offering her a hand up even though she didn't need it. Their fingers tangled briefly. Neither of them let go immediately. "Again?" he asked, mouth quirking. "Again," she agreed. But they both knew they weren't just talking about training anymore. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. Jason started finding excuses to seek her out, asking her opinion on border disputes, inviting her to evening walks through the forest, sitting beside her at council meetings when there were plenty of other seats available. And Susan, who had spent 4 years trusting no one, found herself leaning into it. Found herself noticing the way his voice dropped when he spoke to her privately. Found herself memorizing the rare, genuine smiles he gave when he thought no one was watching. Found herself wanting. It terrified her. "You're thinking too loud," Greytooth seemed to say one night, huffing disapprovingly from her spot by the fire. "I don't know what you mean," Susan muttered, staring at the ceiling of her room. Greytooth's expression clearly communicated. "Liar. It's complicated. Everything is complicated. Bite him or don't. Stop moping." "I'm not moping." Greytooth turned her back with a theatrical sigh. Susan threw a pillow at her. "You're no help." Winter came early that year, covering Northridge in snow that transformed the territory into something from a dream. Jason found Susan on the ramparts one evening, watching the sun set over the frozen forest. He'd brought 2 cups of mulled wine, steam curling into the cold air. "Thought you might be cold," he said, offering one. She took it gratefully, their fingers brushing. "Thank you." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, shoulders almost touching. "Do you miss it?" Jason asked eventually. "The forest. Being alone." Susan considered the question. "Sometimes. The quiet. The simplicity of only needing to survive." She paused. "But no. Not really." "Why not?" She looked at him, really looked. At the way the fading light caught in his dark hair, the strong line of his jaw, the careful way he always stood close enough to make her feel seen, but far enough to let her breathe. "Because I'm tired of just surviving," she said quietly. "I want to live." Something shifted in his expression. Softened. "You're living, Susan. He stopped, seemed to struggle with words. "You're extraordinary. The way you've claimed space in this pack, the way wolves twice your age listen when you speak, the way you..." He stopped again, jaw tightening. "The way I what?" Susan asked, heart hammering. Jason set his cup down on the stone ledge, turned to face her fully. "The way you make me forget that I'm supposed to be focused on pack politics and border disputes and all the other responsibilities I carry." His voice dropped. "Instead, all I think about is you." Susan's breath caught. "Jason." "I know," he said quickly. "I know this is complicated. I know you have no reason to trust an Alpha King after what yours did to you. I know I should give you space and time and..." She kissed him. It was clumsy, rushed, born of months of tension and wanting and fear. But the moment their lips met, something clicked into place, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. Jason made a sound low in his throat, hands coming up to cup her face gently, carefully, like she was something precious that might shatter. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Susan found herself smiling. "You talk too much," she said. He laughed, pressing his forehead to hers. "Noted." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in winter cold and something infinitely warmer. "This doesn't fix anything," Susan whispered. I'm still broken in ways I don't know how to explain. You're not broken. His thumb traced her cheekbone. And even if you were, I'd still choose you. Every time. Why? Because you're you. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. And that's more than enough. Susan's throat tightened. She'd spent years believing she was too little, too weak, too wrong. And here was someone who looked at her and saw more than enough. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. The relationship part. Neither do I, really. Jason smiled. We'll figure it out together. What if I mess it up? Then we'll fix it. Together. That word, together, settled something in her chest. She kissed him again, slower this time, deeper, letting herself lean into the warmth of him without fear. When they finally returned to the hall, snow had started falling soft and silent and covering the world in white. Greytooth took one look at them, huffed approvingly, and went back to sleep. The bond formed gradually over the following months. Not a forced claiming, not a political arrangement, but something they built deliberately, carefully, like constructing a house meant to last. Jason courted her the way wolves did when they mended, bringing her fresh kills from his hunts, teaching her the old songs his pack sang under the moon, sitting with her in comfortable silence when words weren't needed. And Susan, who had never believed she deserved gentleness, learned to accept it without flinching. They didn't rush, didn't perform for the pack's expectations. Instead, they learned each other, the scars that marked them both, the fears they carried, the dreams they'd stopped letting themselves dream. Tell me about your family, Susan said one night, curled against his side in front of the fire in his chambers. Jason was quiet for a long moment. My father was an alpha who believed power meant dominance. He ruled through fear, crushed anyone who questioned him. His arm tightened around her. Including me. What happened? I challenged him when I turned 18. Beat him. Took the pack. His voice was flat, emotionless. He never forgave me for proving he was weak. Susan tilted her head up to look at him. Where is he now? Dead. Picked a fight with a bear 6 months after I took his crown. The bear won. Jason's mouth twisted. I didn't mourn him. Good, Susan said simply. Some parents don't deserve mourning. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. What about your mother? Susan tensed. She died in childbirth. With me. She paused. My father blamed me for that. Said I killed the only thing he ever loved. Susan. It's fine. She said it automatically, the same lie she'd told herself for years. Jason shifted, turning her gently so they were face to face. It's not fine. And you're not responsible for someone else's inability to love you properly. The words cracked something open in her chest. He was my father, she whispered. He was supposed to. I know. Jason's thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. And he failed. But his failure doesn't define your worth. Susan pressed her face into his chest, breathing him in pine and smoke and safety. I love you, she said, muffled against his shirt. I don't know when it happened, but I do. She felt him go still. Then his arms wrapped around her, solid and sure. I love you too, he said quietly. I think I have since you threatened me with your bone knife in the forest. That surprised a laugh out of her. Really? Really? He pulled back just enough to see her face. You were fierce and feral and absolutely unwilling to bow. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. You're ridiculous. Maybe. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. But I'm yours. Yours. The words settled into her bones like warmth. The formal mate bond ceremony happened under the full moon in the heart of winter. The entire pack gathered, hundreds of wolves forming a circle around the ancient stone altar where Northridge alphas had claimed their mates for generations. Susan wore white, not the fragile white of innocence, but the stark white of snow that survived winter. Her copper hair hung loose down her back, woven with silver threads that caught the moonlight. Jason stood waiting for her at the altar, dressed in ceremonial black, crown glinting on his brow. When their eyes met, he smiled, not the careful, measured smile of an alpha king, but the real, unguarded smile he saved only for her. Greytooth walked beside Susan, serving as her honor guard, because of course she did. The ceremony was simple. Ancient words spoken under moonlight. Promises made and meant. Blood shared and mingled. When Jason pressed his palm to hers, their blood mixing between them, Susan felt something shift, a thread of gold weaving between their souls, binding them not through force but choice. "My Luna," Jason said quietly, for her ears only. "My Alpha," Susan replied. Then he kissed her, and the pack howled their approval, hundreds of voices rising toward the moon in celebration. When they broke apart, Susan looked out at the gathered wolves, her pack now, and felt something she hadn't felt since before the forest. She belonged. Not because someone allowed it, but because she'd claimed it. What would you do if the person who abandoned you suddenly needed your help? Would you offer mercy, or let them face the consequences alone? Spring came like a promise kept, melting the snow and coaxing green life from frozen ground. Susan had been Luna of Northridge for 3 months, and the role fit her like a weapon she'd been training with her whole life, natural, deadly, hers. She walked through the territory with Jason at her side, visiting families, settling disputes, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. The pack didn't just respect her. They loved her. Because she'd earned it, one choice at a time. "You're smiling," Jason observed one morning as they reviewed patrol reports. "Am I not allowed to smile?" "You're allowed to do whatever you want. I'm just enjoying it." He leaned over, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're happy." Susan considered that. Happiness had seemed like such an impossible concept for so long, something other people got to have. But yes, she was happy. "Don't let it go to your head," she said, trying for dismissive but landing somewhere closer to fond. Too late. She rolled her eyes, but couldn't quite suppress her smile. That was when Torvin burst into the room, breathing hard, face grim. "Alpha. Luna." He dipped his head briefly. "We have a situation." Jason's expression shifted immediately, all business. "What kind of situation?" "Messenger from Silverstone. Arrived at dawn, half dead from running through the night." Torvin's jaw tightened. "They're requesting an urgent council with Northridge leadership. Says it's a matter of life and death." Susan's blood went cold. Silverstone. Her father's pack. She hadn't thought about them in months, had locked that part of her past away so thoroughly she'd almost convinced herself it no longer existed. Jason's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. "Did they say what they want?" "No. Just that it's urgent." Torvin glanced at Susan, something like sympathy flickering in his weathered face. "The messenger didn't know you were here, Luna. Nearly fainted when I told him." "Where is he now?" Susan asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Guest quarters. Under guard." "Good." She stood, Jason rising with her. "Bring him to the council chamber. We'll hear what Silverstone wants." The messenger was young, barely 20, with the lean build of a runner and the haunted eyes of someone who'd seen something terrible. He knelt immediately when Susan and Jason entered the council chamber, flanked by Torvin and the other advisors. "Luna," he breathed, voice cracking. "I didn't know, they said you were dead." "Clearly not," Susan said coolly. "What does Silverstone want?" The messenger swallowed hard. "The pack is falling apart. Alpha King Anthony," he stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. "He's dying." Silence crashed through the room. Susan felt nothing. No shock. No grief. Nothing except a distant curiosity, like hearing about a stranger's misfortune. "How?" Jason asked, voice carefully neutral. "Sickness. Started 6 months ago. The healers say it's his blood, something eating him from the inside." The messenger's hands shook. "But it's more than that. Without strong leadership, the pack is fracturing. Wolves are leaving, alliances are breaking. We're vulnerable to attacks from every side. And?" Susan's voice could have cut glass. The messenger looked up at her, desperate. "He's asking for you." "Excuse me?" "Alpha King Anthony. He's asking for his daughter." The words tumbled out in a rush. "He says he was wrong. That he needs to see you before he dies?" Susan finished flatly. "Yes." She laughed, sharp and humorless. "How convenient. 6 years of silence, and now he needs me. Luna, please." "Please what?" Her voice rose, months of buried rage suddenly surfacing. "Please rush to his bedside? Please forgive him for leaving me to die in a forest? Please pretend that sorry makes up for years of believing I was worthless. The messenger flinched. Jason's hand found the small of her back, not restraining, just anchoring, reminding her she wasn't alone. Susan took a breath, released it. What else? She asked, voice steadier. The messenger hesitated. There's a challenge. Beta Cyrus. He's been gathering support, planning to take the pack when the Alpha dies. He's cruel, violent. If he takes control, the young wolf's voice dropped. Silverstone will become a nightmare. Let it, Susan said coldly. Not my pack. Not my problem. But we're done here. She turned to leave. He said to tell you he's sorry. The messenger's voice cracked with desperation. He said you were right. That he was wrong. That you were never the mistake he was. Susan stopped. Her hand was on the door handle. One more step, and she'd be free of this. But something in those words, the echo of her own pain, spoken through someone else's mouth, made her pause. Susan, Jason said quietly, coming to stand beside her. You don't owe him anything. I know. If you want to refuse, I'll back you. The pack will back you. I know that too. She turned back to face the messenger, who was still kneeling, trembling with exhaustion and fear. How long does he have? She asked. Days. Maybe a week. Susan looked at Jason. What do you think? He studied her carefully. I think this is your choice, and I'll support whatever you decide. He paused. But I also think you're not the kind of person who can walk away from wolves suffering because their alpha failed them. Damn him for knowing her so well. If I go, she said slowly, I'm not going to forgive him. No one's asking you to. And if this is some trap, then we'll burn Silverstone to the ground. Jason's voice was casual, but his eyes were steel. Together. That word again. Together. Susan closed her eyes, weighing mercy against rage, duty against self-preservation. Finally, she opened them. We'll go, she said. But on our terms. Full escort. Armed guard. And if your Alpha King thinks he can manipulate me. She looked at the messenger coldly. Tell him his daughter learned a few things in the forest, including how to recognize a predator. The messenger nodded frantically. Thank you, Luna. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Susan interrupted. I haven't decided whether to help or watch it all burn. They left at dawn 3 days later. Susan, Jason, Torvin, and 20 of Northridge's finest warriors. Greytooth, naturally, refused to be left behind. The journey to Silverstone territory took 2 days of hard riding. Susan spent most of it silent, lost in memories she'd tried to bury. On the second night, when they made camp, Jason found her sitting apart from the others, staring into the fire. Want company? He asked. She nodded. He settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a while, they just sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. I don't know what I'm going to feel when I see him, Susan admitted quietly. Rage? Grief? Nothing. Maybe all of it, Jason said. Maybe none. Either way, it's okay. What if I can't do it? What if I get there and just break? He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. Then you break. And I'll be there to help you put the pieces back together. His thumb traced circles on her palm. You're the strongest person I know, Susan. But strength doesn't mean never falling apart. It means knowing you can rebuild. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. I'm scared. I know. Not of him. Of me. Of what I might become if I let myself hate him the way I want to. Jason pressed a kiss to her hair. You won't. Because hate is easy, and you've never chosen easy. They sat there until the fire burned low, holding each other against the dark. Silverstone Castle rose from the valley like a monument to everything Susan had tried to forget. Gray stone walls. Sharp towers. The same cold, imposing architecture that had made her feel small even before her father deemed her worthless. The gates opened as they approached, and a handful of wolves emerged, the remaining council, from the look of them. All older. All watching her with expressions ranging from shock to shame. One of them, a woman with silver-streaked hair, stepped forward, eyes wet. Little Susan, she whispered. Is it truly you? Susan recognized her, Mira, who had been kind when kindness was rare. Who had snuck her sweets and told her stories. "It's me," Susan said, voice carefully neutral. Myra's face crumpled. "We thought you were dead. We thought," she stopped, shook her head. "Forgive us. Forgive us for not searching harder." "You want forgiveness?" Susan asked softly. "Tell me, did you know what he planned to do with me?" Silence. "That's what I thought." Susan dismounted, Jason immediately at her side. "Where is he?" "His chambers. Top of the North Tower." Myra's voice shook. He's not what you remember." "Good," Susan said coldly. "Neither am I." They entered the castle, footsteps echoing on stone floors Susan had last walked as a child. Everything felt smaller than she remembered. Less intimidating. Or maybe she was just bigger now. The climb to the North Tower seemed to take forever and no time at all. When they reached the chamber doors, Mira stopped. "Do you want us to?" "No," Susan said. "Just me and Jason." Mira nodded, stepping back. Susan's hand was on the door handle when Jason caught her wrist gently. "Last chance to change your mind," he said quietly. "We can turn around right now." She looked up at him, this male who had taught her that alpha kings could be kind, that power could be wielded with care, that love wasn't something she had to earn. "I need to do this," she said. "I know." She pushed open the door. The chamber was dim, heavy curtains blocking most of the afternoon light. It smelled of sickness and decay and something else, something that made Susan's wolf recoil. Fear. In the center of the room, on a bed that seemed far too large, lay Alpha King Anthony. Except he wasn't a king anymore. He was a dying old man. His face was gaunt, skin stretched tight over bones that seemed too prominent. His once powerful frame had withered to almost nothing. The crown that had seemed so heavy and important sat on a bedside table, forgotten. But his eyes were the same. Sharp and aware and filled with something that might have been regret. He saw her and something broke across his face. "Susan," he rasped. "You came." She stood in the doorway, Jason a solid presence behind her, and said nothing. "Because what did you say to the man who had tried to kill you? How did you speak to the father who had chosen pride over love?" Anthony struggled to sit up, failed, slumped back against the pillows. "You're alive," he said, voice cracking. I hoped, but I didn't dare believe." "Why?" The word came out sharp. "Why did you hope? You left me to die." "I know. You threw me away like I was garbage." "I know. So why?" Her voice rose. "Why ask for me now? Why pretend you care after 6 years of silence?" Anthony closed his eyes, breathing labored. When he opened them again, they were wet. "Because I was a fool," he said simply. "A proud, terrified fool who thought strength meant dominance and weakness was unforgivable." He coughed, wet and painful. "And I lost everything because of it." "You didn't lose anything," Susan said coldly. "You threw it away." "Yes." His voice broke. "I did." Silence stretched between them, years of pain compressed into this one moment. "I'm dying," Anthony said finally. "The healers say days, maybe hours. And I find I don't fear death." He looked at her, really looked. "But I fear dying without telling you the truth." "What truth?" "That you were never the mistake." Tears tracked down his wasted face. "I was. You were perfect, fierce and stubborn and strong in ways I was too blind to see. And instead of celebrating that, I tried to destroy it." Susan's chest tightened. "Your mother," he continued, voice rough with grief. "She would have been so proud of what you've become. And so ashamed of what I did." "Don't," Susan said sharply. "Don't use her to." "I'm not." He coughed again, grimacing. "I'm stating fact. She loved you. From the moment she knew she was carrying you, she loved you." And her last words. He stopped, struggling for breath. Her last words were protect her. And I couldn't even do that right. Something cracked in Susan's chest, not forgiveness, but understanding. He'd been broken too. Just differently. "You want absolution," she said flatly. "You want me to tell you it's okay, that I forgive you, that we can pretend the last 6 years didn't happen." "No," Anthony said quietly. "I want nothing. I deserve nothing." He looked at her with eyes that had finally learned humility. "I just wanted you to know that I see you now. And you're magnificent." The word hit her like a physical blow. Magnificent. Not worthless. Not a mistake. Not a disappointment. Magnificent. Silverstone is falling apart, he continued weakly. Cyrus will take the pack if I die without naming an heir. And he will destroy everything. Not my problem, Susan said automatically. I know. You owe this pack nothing. You owe me less than nothing. He looked at her with something like hope. But there are innocents here. Children who didn't choose their alpha. Families who will suffer under Cyrus's cruelty. And I thought. He trailed off. You thought what? That maybe the daughter I threw away might be kind enough to save the pack I failed. Jason's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Susan looked at her father, this man who had shaped her life through his absence, his cruelty, his absolute failure to be what she needed. And she realized something. He couldn't hurt her anymore. His opinion, his approval, his rejection, none of it mattered. Because she'd built a life without him. Built herself without him. And that self was enough. I'll think about it, she said finally. Relief flooded Anthony's face. Thank you. Don't thank me. Her voice was ice. Because I'm not doing this for you. If I help Silverstone, it's for the wolves who had no choice in your failures. Not for you. I understand. Do you? She stepped closer to the bed, and he flinched slightly, an instinctive response to the power radiating from her. I am Luna of Northridge. Mate to an alpha king who actually knows what strength means. I command wolves through respect, not fear. And I did it all without you. I know, he whispered. I can see it. Good. She turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. Yes. She looked back at him, and her smile was sharp. I survived. Despite you. Despite the forest. Despite everything. And that survival made me into something you could never be. What's that? Someone worth following. She walked out without looking back. Jason followed, closing the door gently behind them. In the hallway, Susan leaned against the stone wall, breathing hard. Are you all right? Jason asked. I don't know. She looked up at him. He apologized. He called me magnificent. And I felt nothing. Just empty. That's not nothing, Jason said gently. That's freedom. The words settled into her like truth. Freedom. From his opinion. From his rejection. From the weight of wanting him to love her. What do we do about Silverstone? She asked. We. Jason raised an eyebrow. This is your choice, love. I know. But I want your counsel. He considered for a moment. Cyrus will destroy this pack if given power. Innocent wolves will suffer. And you have the authority to prevent that. He paused. But you also have the right to walk away and let Silverstone face the consequences of its own failures. That's not counsel. That's just stating the obvious. Fine. You want my honest opinion. His storm gray eyes held hers. I think you're too good to let innocents suffer for one man's sins. I think you'll help. Because that's who you are. Damn him for being right. If I do this, she said slowly, I'm not taking Silverstone. I don't want it. Then what? I find someone else. Someone who'll lead with wisdom, not cruelty. She smiled faintly. And I make sure my father's last act as alpha is naming the right heir. Even if it kills him to admit you were right? Especially then. Jason grinned. I love you. I know. She kissed him quickly. Now let's go save a pack that doesn't deserve it. The Silverstone Council chamber felt smaller than Susan remembered, or maybe she'd just grown too large for spaces built to diminish her. She stood at the head of the ancient stone table, Jason at her right, Greytooth lying at her feet like a queen's guardian. The remaining Silverstone Council sat in various states of shock, disbelief, and poorly concealed hope. Mira spoke first. Luna, we are grateful you've chosen to help us. But I must ask, what exactly do you propose? That depends, Susan said calmly. Tell me about Cyrus. An older male, Gareth, if she remembered correctly, shifted uncomfortably. Beta Cyrus has served Silverstone for 12 years. He's strong, capable in combat. And cruel, Mira interrupted, earning a sharp look from Gareth. He rules his subordinates through fear. Punishes dissent harshly. There have been incidents. What kind of incidents? Jason asked, voice deceptively mild. Myra's jaw tightened. 3 wolves dead in training accidents in the past year. 2 families exiled for speaking against him. And he's been gathering loyalists, wolves who believe strength means dominance, that Omega and weaker wolves should serve or be culled. Susan's blood went cold. And my father allowed this? Guilty silence. He was weak, Gareth said finally. Distracted by illness. And Cyrus. Cyrus is very good at hiding his nature from those he needs to fool. Where is he now? Susan asked. In the western barracks with his loyalists. About 40 wolves. Mira leaned forward. Luna, if you challenge him directly, it will mean bloodshed. He won't surrender power peacefully. I'm counting on it, Susan said softly. Jason glanced at her, something like concern flickering in his eyes. Susan. I'm not letting a tyrant take this pack. Her voice was steel. Too many innocents will suffer. So here's what's going to happen. She looked around the table. You're going to call a full pack gathering. Tomorrow at sunset. Everyone attends, no exceptions. And then? Gareth asked warily. Then I'm going to make Cyrus an offer he can't refuse. What offer? Susan smiled, sharp and cold. Me. The next day passed in a blur of preparation and tension. Jason cornered her in the guest chambers they'd been given, closing the door with deliberate care. Tell me you're not planning what I think you're planning, he said. Susan continued sharpening her blade, a beautiful weapon Jason had given her as a mating gift. That depends on what you think I'm planning. Susan. She looked up at him, reading the worry in his storm gray eyes. I'm not going to do anything reckless. You're going to challenge Cyrus. Maybe. Definitely. He moved closer, taking her face gently in his hands. And as much as I admire your courage, I'm also terrified you're going to get yourself killed to prove a point. I'm not trying to prove a point. She set the blade down, covering his hands with hers. I'm trying to save people. There's a difference. Let me fight him instead. No. Susan. This is my pack, Jason. My history. My demons. She stood, pressing close to him. And I need to do this. Not because I have something to prove, but because I'm the only one who can. Why? Because I know what it's like to be deemed worthless by someone in power. And I will not let that happen to anyone else. Not while I can stop it. He studied her face for a long moment, then sighed. You're not going to change your mind, are you? No. Then I'm not leaving your side. I wouldn't expect anything less. She kissed him, deep and thorough and full of all the things she couldn't quite say. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. Come back to me, he whispered. Always. Sunset painted the sky blood red as the Silverstone pack gathered in the ceremonial grounds, a massive clearing surrounded by ancient stones where alphas had been chosen for generations. Hundreds of wolves assembled, their nervous energy crackling through the air like lightning before a storm. They knew something was happening. They just didn't know what. Susan stood on the raised platform at the center, Jason beside her, gray tooth at her feet. She wore simple leather fighting clothes, practical, unadorned, and her copper hair was braided back in the way forest wolves wore it. She looked nothing like the frightened child who'd been dragged from this castle 6 years ago. She looked like a Luna. Cyrus arrived with his loyalists, 40 wolves, all armed, all radiating the kind of confidence that came from never being challenged. He was broad-shouldered and scarred, with cruel eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. Well, he called out, voice carrying across the gathering. The lost princess returns. How touching. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Susan said nothing, just watched him approach the platform with the patience of a predator waiting for prey to step into range. Cyrus climbed the steps, stopping a few feet away. Up close, he was even more intimidating, easily twice her size, radiating barely controlled violence. I heard you wanted to speak with me, he said, voice dripping with mockery. The little Omega who was thrown away wants to give orders now? I have a proposition, Susan said calmly. That surprised him. Oh? And what could you possibly offer me? Leadership of Silverstone. Silence crashed through the gathering. Cyrus laughed, harsh and disbelieving. You're going to give me the pack? Just like that. Not give, Susan corrected. Let you earn it. His eyes narrowed. How? Single combat. You and me. If you win, you take Silverstone, no one will contest it. I'll even use my influence as Luna of Northridge to legitimize your claim. And if you win, you leave. Forever. And Silverstone chooses a new leader through proper council vote. Cyrus studied her, suspicion warring with greed. Why would you risk that? You could just refuse to acknowledge my claim, bring Northridge forces to crush me. Because this pack deserves better than being conquered, Susan said. They deserve a leader who earns their loyalty, not one who takes it by force. She paused. And because I want you to understand something. What's that? That the Omega you're about to underestimate is the last mistake you'll ever make. Cyrus's face darkened. Then he smiled, slow and vicious. You're on, little princess. He turned to the crowd. Let it be witnessed. Single combat for leadership of Silverstone. To the death or yield. The crowd erupted in shocked voices. Jason's hand found Susan's briefly. Be careful, he said quietly. Always am. She stepped into the center of the platform. Cyrus cracked his knuckles, circling her like a wolf stalking wounded prey. I'm going to enjoy this. Your father should have killed you properly the first time. He tried, Susan said mildly. I survived. You won't. He lunged. The first strike was brutal, all power and rage, meant to overwhelm through sheer force. Susan slipped aside, letting his momentum carry him past her. The crowd gasped. Cyrus spun, snarling. Stand still. No. He came again, faster this time, a flurry of strikes meant to corner her. Susan danced between them, her forest training making her fluid where he was rigid, adaptable where he was predictable. She'd learned to fight from wolves and survival. He'd learned from dominance and cruelty. There was a difference. Fight me. Cyrus roared, frustration mounting. I am fighting you, Susan said. You're just too slow to notice. That broke his control. He shifted partially, his wolf form bleeding through, claws extending, teeth sharpening. It was against the rules of single combat, but Cyrus had never cared much for rules. The crowd murmured in disapproval, but no one stopped him. Susan smiled. Greytooth, she said quietly. The old she-wolf rose from where she'd been lying, stretched almost casually, and stepped onto the platform. Cyrus faltered. That's cheating. You shifted first, Susan pointed out. I'm just evening the odds. Then she shifted too. The transformation took seconds, bones reshaping, for erupting copper bright in the fading light. But when she stood on 4 paws, something was different. She was larger than she should be. Stronger. Her eyes glowed with an inner light that had nothing to do with the moon. The forest had claimed her, reshaped her, made her into something that belonged to the wild itself. Cyrus's confidence cracked. Susan didn't give him time to recover. She moved like water, like wind, like every lesson the forest had beaten into her bones. Greytooth flanked her, the two of them working in perfect synchronization, hurting, harrying, wearing him down. Cyrus fought with desperate fury, all his power and none of the grace needed to use it properly. He was strong, yes, but Susan was inevitable. The killing blow came when Cyrus overextended, lunging for Susan's throat. She dropped low, rolled beneath him, and came up behind, jaws clamping down on the back of his neck with the precision of a wolf who knew exactly where to bite. Not to kill. To dominate. Cyrus went still, the primal part of his brain recognizing defeat. Susan held him there for a long moment, making sure every wolf in the gathering understood she could kill him. Easily. She was choosing not to. Then she released him and shifted back to human form, standing over his prone wolf body. Yield, she said quietly. Cyrus shifted back, face pressed into the platform, blood trickling from where her teeth had pierced skin. I yield, he gasped. The crowd erupted half in shock, half in jubilation. Susan looked out at them, at hundreds of faces watching her with something between awe and hope. Cyrus is banished from Silverstone territory, she announced, voice carrying across the gathering. Effective immediately. Any who follow him are welcome to leave. But understand this, her eyes swept the crowd. Silverstone will no longer be a pack built on fear. You deserve better. You deserve leaders who earn your loyalty, not demand it. She turned to the council members standing at the edge of the platform. You have 3 days to choose a new alpha through proper vote. Choose wisely. Choose someone who will protect the weak, honor the strong, and remember that rank is not the same as worth. Mira stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Luna, you could take the pack yourself. You've earned the right. I don't want it, Susan interrupted gently. This was never about claiming power. It was about making sure power went to someone who deserved it. She looked at Jason, who was watching her with an expression of utter admiration. Besides, she added with a small smile, I already have a pack. And a mate who's probably going to lecture me about taking unnecessary risks. Absolutely, Jason agreed, stepping forward to wrap an arm around her waist. But that can wait until we're alone. The gathering laughed, uncertain at first, then genuine. Susan let herself lean into Jason's warmth, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the realization of what she'd just done. She'd saved her father's pack. Not for him, but for everyone he'd failed. Anthony died that night. Susan was there, standing at his bedside with Jason's hand in hers. The old king's breathing had grown shallow, labored. But when he saw her, something like peace crossed his face. You did it, he rasped. Saved them. I did, Susan agreed. I knew you would. He coughed, grimacing. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. I know. He managed a weak smile. Your mother would be so proud. Susan said nothing. She'd run out of words for him. Susan, he said, voice barely a whisper now. I know I have no right to ask. But, do you think, someday, you might forgive me? She looked at him, this man who had shaped her through his absence, his cruelty, his absolute failure to see her worth. Maybe, she said finally. But not today. Fair enough. His eyes closed. Thank you. For coming. For saving them. For being everything I wasn't. His breathing stuttered. Stopped. And Alpha King Anthony of Silverstone died the way he'd lived, with regrets he'd left too late to fix. Susan felt nothing except a distant, hollow relief. Are you all right? Jason asked quietly. I think so. She looked down at her father's body. I thought I'd feel something more. Grief or anger or something. Maybe the grief happened years ago, Jason suggested. When he left you in the forest. Maybe this is just the ending you already survived. Susan considered that. Maybe. She reached out, closed her father's eyes with gentle fingers. Goodbye, she said softly. I hope wherever you are, you finally understand what you lost. Then she turned and walked away from Silverstone Castle for the second time in her life. This time, though, she wasn't running. She was choosing to leave. There was a difference. 3 days later, Silverstone's council chose their new alpha, not Cyrus, not any of his loyalists, but a younger wolf named Rowan who had quietly served the pack with wisdom and compassion for years. He was strong enough to lead, wise enough to listen, and humble enough to know the difference. When he knelt before Susan to receive her blessing as Luna of Northridge, she lifted him up with gentle hands. Rule well, she said. Rule justly. And remember, rank is earned, not inherited. I will, Luna. Rowan's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you. For everything. She nodded, then turned to the gathered crowd. Silverstone is whole again. And while I will always be connected to this pack through blood, my home is Northridge now. She smiled. But should you ever need aid, you need only ask. Allies stand together. The crowd held their approval, a sound that echoed across the valley, full of hope and new beginnings. As Susan and Jason rode away from Silverstone territory, Greytooth loping alongside them, Susan found herself looking back one last time. At the castle where she'd been born. At the forest where she'd died and been reborn. At the pack she'd saved without claiming. Any regrets? Jason asked, following her gaze. Susan thought about it, really thought. No, she said finally. I gave them a chance. What they do with it is up to them. And your father? He made his choices. I made mine. We both have to live, or not live, with the consequences. Jason reached over, lacing his fingers through hers. I'm proud of you. For what? I didn't forgive him. For being strong enough to choose mercy without needing to forgive. He squeezed her hand. That's real power, Susan. Not dominance. Not cruelty. just the ability to choose compassion even when rage would be easier. Something warm unfurled in her chest. "Can we go home now?" she asked quietly. "Absolutely." They rode toward Northridge as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. And for the first time in her life, Susan understood what home really meant. Not a place, not a pack, but the choice to belong somewhere and the knowledge that just a simple message delivered by a Silverstone scout. A monument had been erected in the forest clearing where Anthony had abandoned Susan, a stone marker placed by the new Alpha Rowan, inscribed with words that made her throat tighten. "Here died a frightened child. Here was born a Luna. May we remember both." Susan read the message 3 times, standing in the council chamber while Jason watched her carefully. "Do you want to see it?" he asked. "I don't know." She set the parchment down. "It feels like closure I didn't ask for. Maybe that's exactly why you need it." She looked at him, reading the concern in his storm gray eyes. "You think I should go? I think you've spent 6 years running from that forest. Maybe it's time to walk back through it, not as the girl who was abandoned, but as the woman who survived." The words settled into her like stones finding the bottom of a riverbed. "Will you come with me?" she asked quietly. "Always." They made the journey alone, just Susan, Jason, and Greytooth, who seemed to understand the significance even if she couldn't speak it. The Thornwood forest looked different in autumn light. Softer somehow, with golden leaves filtering the sun and the scent of earth and growing things replacing the memory of rain and fear. Susan led them through paths she still knew by heart, muscle memory guiding her feet even after years away. When they reached the clearing, she stopped. The monument stood in the center, simple gray stone, waist-high, covered in fallen leaves that someone had clearly been brushing away regularly. Fresh flowers lay at its base. Susan approached slowly, reading the inscription again in carved stone. "Here died a frightened child. Here was born a Luna. May we remember both." Her hand traced the letters, feeling the grooves worn by careful hands. "They remember," she said quietly. "The pack remembers what happened here." "They should," Jason said from behind her. "It's part of their history. Part of yours." Susan knelt, fingers brushing the flowers. "I never wanted to be remembered for this. For being the Omega who was thrown away." "You're not." Jason knelt beside her. "You're remembered for surviving it. For becoming something greater than the cruelty that tried to destroy you." She looked at him, eyes burning. "I was so scared. That night, I really thought I was going to die." "I know. And part of me did die. The part that trusted easily. The part that believed family meant safety." She looked back at the stone. "I'm not sure I'll ever get that back." "Maybe you don't need to," Jason said gently. "Maybe the person you are now, scarred and strong and unwilling to accept cruelty as normal, maybe that's exactly who you were meant to become." Tears tracked down her face, and she didn't bother wiping them away. "Do you think he knew?" she asked. "My father. Do you think he understood what he did to me?" "I think he died understanding," Jason said. "Whether that's enough, that's for you to decide." Susan sat there for a long time, the autumn sun warming her back, Greytooth's solid presence beside her. Finally, she stood. "I forgive him," she said quietly. Jason looked up surprised. "You do?" "Not for him. For me." She looked at the monument, then at the forest that had raised her. "I forgive him because holding on to that rage was like carrying him with me everywhere. And I'm tired of giving him space in my life." She reached down, picked up a smooth stone from the clearing floor, and placed it carefully on top of the monument. "Goodbye, Father," she said. "I hope you found peace." "I finally have." Then she turned and walked away from the clearing, Jason and Greytooth at her side. Behind them, the forest whispered in the autumn wind, not goodbye, but acknowledgement. The girl who had died here would always be part of these trees. But the Luna who walked away belonged to herself. They returned to Northridge 3 days later, arriving just as the full moon rose over the territory. The pack was gathered in the ceremonial grounds, not for a formal event, but for the monthly moon celebration, where wolves ran together under silver light and howled their joy to the sky. Susan and Jason joined them, shifting into wolf form and letting the pack's energy wash over them like a wave. She ran with Jason at her side, Greytooth leading them through the forest with the confidence of an elder showing pups the old paths. Around them, hundreds of wolves moved as one, not in formation, but in harmony. This was pack. Not dominance. Not fear. But chosen family, built through trust and earned through loyalty. When they reached the highest point in the territory, a cliff overlooking the valley where Northridge sprawled below, Susan stopped. The pack gathered around her, settling into watchful quiet. Susan lifted her head and howled. It started low, mournful, a sound that held 6 years of pain, of survival, of learning to be more than what others said she was. Then it shifted, rising higher, stronger, filling with joy and triumph and the absolute certainty that she had earned every moment of this life. The pack joined her, hundreds of voices rising together, their collective song echoing across the valley. And in that moment, standing on a cliff with moonlight painting her copper for silver, surrounded by wolves who had chosen her as much as she'd chosen them, Susan understood something profound. Revenge wasn't rage. It wasn't violence or cruelty returned. Revenge was this, standing powerful enough that the person who'd tried to break you would have to bow if they ever saw you again. Revenge was becoming so magnificent that their rejection became meaningless. Revenge was choosing mercy not because they deserved it, but because you were strong enough to grant it. Her father had tried to kill her. Instead, he'd forged her into something he could never be. And that survival, that triumph, that absolute refusal to let cruelty define her, was the cruelest revenge of all. Because he died knowing she had won. Not through violence. Not through dominance. But by becoming exactly what he'd been too blind to see she always was. Magnificent. Jason shifted beside her, nuzzling her neck in wolf form, a gesture of love and pride and partnership. She leaned into him, letting the pack's energy surround them both. Below, Northridge glowed with firelight and life. Behind them, the thornwood forest whispered its approval. Above them, the moon watched with ancient patience. And Susan, once abandoned, once broken, once deemed worthless, stood as Luna, powerful and chosen and exactly where she belonged. The child her father left to die had survived. The woman she'd become had conquered. Not through rage, but through the simple, devastating act of refusing to let cruelty win. She held again, and the pack answered. And in that chorus of voices rising toward the moon, Susan found what she'd been searching for all along. Not vengeance. Not even justice. Just peace. The kind that came from knowing she was enough. She'd always been enough. And no one, not her father, not fate, not even the forest that tried to kill her, could ever take that away again. Years later, when wolves told stories around fires, they would speak of the Luna who commanded without cruelty, who led without dominance, who proved that strength wasn't about power, it was about choice. They would tell of the Alpha King who knelt first, who chose partnership over possession, who built a kingdom on respect instead of fear. And they would whisper about the girl who was left to die in a forest and rose to become something legend itself couldn't contain. But in the quiet moments, when the moon hung full and silver, Susan would think about that 11-year-old child shivering in the mud, whispering promises to an indifferent sky. "I will live," she'd said. And she had. Not just survived, but lived fully, fiercely, magnificently. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out.